All right, so this next session is for the secretaries of our lovely ensembles and our chapters. If you are a secretary, if you would like to be a secretary, or if you know a secretary and would like to help them out, I'm so excited to see y'all here. And I'm not gonna, as I did with the treasurer section, I'm not gonna hang around too long to wait for like any late comers or anything. So I'm just going to turn this right over to Chris so that we can get the most out of his session. And Chris, would you like me to spotlight your camera view, or would you like to see a gallery view of everybody's faces?
Actually, the way we did this last year was that you were actually showing the content from
Yes,
that I sent you links for.
you did send me links for that. So I'm going to mute myself. Chris, I'll let you go ahead and open up, and then I will pull up those links and we'll go from there.
Thank you very much. And so this is the session for chapter secretaries. The online training that's available from the Society actually does a pretty good job and is pretty comprehensive. So I'm not going to try and cover all of that in this session. What I would like to do instead is to highlight a few key things, some of them that we just touched on at the end of the treasurer section, but the kind of the key things that I think are the most important for the chapter secretaries to remember. And with that, Katie, can we show the first link?
And while you're setting that up, Katie and Chris, can we also ask that you please, in the upper right-hand corner of your picture is your name. You can change your name and what chapter you're with so that we can keep track of those also, please.
So, Katie, how we doing?
I'm looking for it. I thought I had it put into a folder and I'm not seeing the folder. So it might have been yes, if you can give me like 2 minutes, I'm sure I can find it in here. So if anybody has any questions right off the bat, go for it.
So I'm going to quickly
sorry.
post something to the chat, which is the list of all my links, just in case that helps.
Aha, found it.
Found it? All right.
Yes.
So the first link should be showing the annual schedule of responsibilities, and there's 2 tabs and a list of tasks. So the 2 tabs at the top of this, one shows kind of the things that secretaries need to do every single month. Those are basically routine things that you're going to be doing always. Let's stay back up at the top of that for the moment. And then the other tab is the as needed and appropriate. These are things that will come up ad hoc that you need to do just basically whenever there's business to transact on those things. As well, this page also then has the month-by-month calendar. And so for that, we can scroll down. These are kind of really important deliverables that the secretary has at different points in the year. And you'll see them here, but you'll also see them, and this is a plug for the leader news that the district produces. The communications team puts out that, and they have basically excerpted this so that when you get the January leader news, it will have the things that the secretary and other officers need to do in the month of January as a reminder. And so there are basically multiple ways that you can get this information about what it is that you need to be doing on any given month. I'm gonna look at my notes again real quick. So going back to the monthly thing, there's the job of just being the secretary. So that means taking the minutes of your chapter board meetings, publishing those appropriately within your chapter. You're verifying any invoices that come in from the society. You're processing membership applications and membership dual membership and transfer requests. As appropriate, then you'll also be doing whole new memberships and reminders. And kind of there's one real key thing here. If your chapter is going to participate in any competition, then you need to make sure that all of your members are currently active members at the date of the competition. And to not do that risks having your chorus disqualified. And so this is like a really critical function, providing your chapter leaders that information about who is currently and will be appropriately members of the chorus or members of the society at the date of the competition. And then helping them with reminders for the people that might have expiration dates leading right up to the competition. And that way you avoid any sort of heartache that the chapter might feel from having expired members on the stage, which would be kind of a disastrous outcome. Before I go on to any questions about sort of this annual schedule of responsibilities, like I said, I'm not going to cover everything. This is the resource as well as the Evergreen Leader News reminders. So hopefully there's enough there to sort of get you going through all of that.
And I would ask, with the competition stuff coming up, now that competitions are happening a little more regularly, in on the secretary side of looking at the member center, do you get to see who is a month to month and who is paid annually?
Yes.
Yeah, because I know that there was a question when one of our groups was getting ready for competition, said like, we've got so many members expiring at such and such a time. That's going to be before contest. And then we had to look, are they monthly or are they annual? So something to keep in mind.
Yes, and that means you really have to be checking not only sort of 6-8 weeks in advance, but also like right up to the date of the competition for those people that might be on the month to month.
Then we do have Sid Brown with a question.
Yeah, real quick, Chris. We talked about insurance earlier, so I'm assuming if a member is expired for several months, they're not going to be covered by insurance, or at least potentially might not be covered if they hurt themselves. Is that correct?
Right. At that point, they sort of revert to the permaguest status and would be similarly not covered. But also then, right, there's the potential for that coverage that the chapter can buy from the society. I don't know if that program has been fully instantiated yet. Okay, moving on to my next link, the new member transactions link.
Chris, the question you just posed about D&O insurance it has not yet been settled, and I will let everybody know as soon as it is.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, obviously one of the core responsibilities for the chapter secretary is keeping all the membership information up to date. Obviously the society at this point has a strong preference for us to do that via member center. And so as the chapter secretary, you need to be pretty facile with that online tool. It's not a great tool. It's occasionally a little bit clunky and hard to use. You can request help from the society, and they're reasonably responsive. I think their SLA says 2 days response time, if I recall properly from the House of Delegates meeting. So just you need to be able to do all the things that you need to do in this. That includes all of these steps that are included in this particular page with respect to adding new members and sort of the sequence of those things. But you also need to be able to do that to check on the status, as we were talking about with respect to competition and reminders that you might want to provide to members as they come up close to their anniversary dates. I think that's really all that I need to say about that. You can submit some questions to me if you're not getting especially if you're not getting a response from the society. I am only perhaps just minutely ahead of anybody else in terms of using this tool. I have fought my way through being able to answer certain questions at the district level with it, and so I might be able to answer your question, and I'm at least a live person at the end of an email. So let's go ahead and let's just, unless there's questions, let's go on to the topic of show licensing. This one is near and dear to my heart because I am a daily participant in this process with the chapter secretaries. As we said in the last hour, chapters are required to license their ability to use music in public performance. And this is the process by which that happens. It's different if you're a US chapter versus being a Canadian chapter. The process always starts with going to the Evergreen website. There's a little online form that you fill in, and that lets me know that your chapter is considering doing a show and asking me to investigate whether or not there are any conflicting shows within a certain 50-mile radius and on the same date. I will get back to you by email and let you know whether or not there is currently any conflicts, but that does not reserve the date for you. If you are a US chapter, the way you reserve the date is you go back online and you fill in the formal BMI-SEA CSAC form and send it to me in triplicate with a check, and that's the US postal mail process. Once I receive that in the mail, then you have reserved your date. I will send you back a copy. Sometimes I will scan it and send it back electronically as well. If there's a short time frame, then you need to know that your show has been approved. For Canadian chapters, the process is slightly different. I still have you do the online form to start. That lets me know that there is a show planned. Once I have said yes, that there are no conflicting dates, then you go online with the SOCAN process, and that's uniquely a Canadian process for clearing your shows. I ask that you send me an electronic copy of the form that you fill out for that. That form is available as well online on the Evergreen website, so you can fill that in and send it to me electronically. I will sign it and turn it back around to you so that you know that you have your show date cleared. So I see the question, and I will go ahead and take it right now. Is Evergreen looking for a full electronic submission or payment process? We are not, because we are not actually the recipients of the payment. The society is actually the recipient of the payment. The checks are all made out to the society rather than to me, and they come through me because I need to sign the forms and approve the show and get it on the calendar, but I don't actually process the payment. I just forward it directly on with the signed form to the society. The bigger question would be whether or not the society itself is planning on doing that in some sort of electronic way, and we can ask them that. So all of that activity that I've just described in parallel for the Canadian and US chapters, that happens either before a show or sort of leading right up to the show. For US chapters, when you get to the end of the year, there is the ASCAP licensing process. And so this is a second process that you go through. And it basically allows you to report on the total volume of tickets that you sold at your shows, as opposed to the prior licensing process where you say the capacity of the venues independent of how many people are actually going to show up. With that, then you send payment and the form directly to the society to let them know that you are reporting on the actual attendance of your events. There are a couple of special cases. The 50-mile radius thing. So the 50-mile radius thing is that the society does not want us to permit two chapters to do shows on the same day if they are within 50 miles of each other. The idea is that if they are that close, then they would potentially draw from each other's audiences, and that conflicting scheduling would then perhaps diminish the audience in one or both shows. And so that is actually one of the special cases that we have in our district. That 50 miles seems a somewhat arbitrary amount, but it's essentially an hour's travel. And the exemptions that I have been allowed to provide by the society basically deal with where there are large geographic barriers between potential audience movement. And so in theory, if you look, say, at the Vancouver chapter and the Nanaimo chapter, they are within a 50-mile radius of each other in a straight line. There is, however, a very large body of water between them that would require a 2 or 3 hour ferry ride to get across. And so the 60-minute travel time is actually probably a better marker. And so that's one case where I'm allowed to grant that permission. The international border between the US and Canada is another one. So if, for example, a Vancouver show and a Bellingham show were to happen on the same day, the chances of them stealing each other's audience, given the time it takes to get through the border, is also probably minimal, and so we can allow that. And then the third possible exception, and we just had a case of this recently. We had shows on the same date for 2 chapters that are fairly close to each other, Seattle and Kitsap. And there is also a ferry ride, although it probably still fits within the 60 minutes. And so it was a little bit squishy. And in that case, the chapter that had the first submitted form is allowed to grant permission to the other chapter that has petitioned to let them have the show on the same day. Basically, the 2 chapters agreed in that particular case that they were unlikely to be stealing each other's audience, and so they were both going to do the show on the same day. The other exception that I want to talk about is previously it's been the case that if there was no charge for a show, or if the show was strictly for the benefit of a third party. So let's say you were doing a benefit show for a local food shelter or a homeless shelter or food bank, then you weren't required to submit the BMI CSAC form. The society changed that rule last spring. And so now even those shows are required to be licensed through the BMI CSAC process. This is an interesting burden on the chapters, because the chapters are still required to make payment for that license, even though they are not collecting any revenue from the event. But that is the rule. Any other questions that I missed? I'm going to check the chat. So the 50-mile radius thing is actually a BHS society restriction. It's not at all related to anything BMI CSAC or SOCAN. And how does this work when you book events 6 to 12 months in advance? It works just like I just said. Basically, first come, first serve on the licenses, and you are allowed to submit your information up to 12 months in advance. Any other questions? Then Katie, let's go ahead and move on to the legal filings and archiving link. So one of the very important things that the chapter secretary does that is sort of less glamorous and perhaps less well known is that they are intended to be both the person who does legal filings for the chapter, but also the archivist for the chapter. And that is, you are intended to maintain all of the legal files and documents for the chapter. And there's a fairly long list of them. Going back to the previous question, do we know why? No, it's just the rule that's been given to us. So returning to this topic then, there's a list of documents that as the chapter secretary you are required to have access to and to maintain for the organization. If you go a little bit further down, Katie, then there's this schedule of how long you need to retain these documents. And they're quite long. So, I mean, some of them obviously you have to maintain forever, like your original charter and articles of incorporation and stuff like that. But like the IRS forms or the CRA forms that you're filing year to year, those you have to maintain for 7 years. And so very often this needs to persist beyond the stay of one particular person as the secretary of the chapter. You need to be sure to hand those things off from person to person and to have them available to the organization as a whole, independent of who's in the role. And then scrolling down a little bit more again, the idea of planning for natural disaster. So the documentation, because there are these retention requirements, probably needs to be preserved in multiple forms. So I have, as a former chapter treasurer, I have a bunch of documents that are related. They're physical documents and stuffed away in a filing cabinet somewhere. But if my house gets flooded or burns down or is otherwise removed from availability, then obviously we don't want those documents to disappear. And so having electronic copies of them stored somewhere is one way of doing that. Big businesses also will pay other companies to maintain their long-term records like that. One of the things that's a little bit tricky about this, and if you're reading the plan for natural disaster part of this slide, you can see that they don't recommend going fully electronic, especially in a cloud environment. And it took me a while to come to understand the reason for that. So typically, it's the case that if you're going to do Google Drive or OneDrive as your repository for your chapter documents, one person is going to be the person that's going to go and create that repository and move all the documents to it. And that one person has the password to get into it. And if that person goes away for whatever reason, then potentially the chapter loses their access to all of those records. And in business, this is considered a very serious risk. And so that's why I think the fully electronic natural disaster recovery is not recommended for us as a small organization. Now, you can mitigate that with best practices. So for example, and Larry can correct me if this is still not true, but with our prior district treasurer, he had a document that he created, which was all of the accounts that we needed to know about and links and passwords and all that sort of stuff. And it was, there was like one extra copy of this document that was given to one person who was not the treasurer. And the document was, titled something like, "If I'm not available, this is the key to the Magic Kingdom." And so as a chapter secretary, you could create such a document, right? Links to all of your repositories, passwords to the accounts, also links to things like where do you go for the Secretary of State filings and other sorts of business and document engagement things. And if you do that and maintain that practice and are careful about handing those things off to successors, then it's probably fine to go ahead with an electronic and cloud-based repository for your long-term storage. It just takes a certain amount of discipline to make sure that that you're doing that. I think that was all of the things that I wanted to talk about. So those are kind of the things that I thought of as key and most important aspects of the chapter secretary's job. If there are additional questions, then let's take those now.
So I would assume that the chapter secretary and the chapter treasurer probably work really closely together. Is that right?
Yes, that's a must. And you know, you've heard some comments from chapter treasurers doing things that might traditionally be considered the secretary's job, and they're doing it because there's also a payment involved. You can solve that by just having the secretary and treasurer be collaborative on that, and the secretary doing their part, the filing, but then the treasurer doing their part of writing the check for it.
Go ahead, David. We'll go David and then we'll go Arnie.
Okay.
My experience is that in chapters, in small chapters, we really just collaborate. All the president, treasurer, and secretary roles kind of mixed up. You know, it's just kind of a melding of the things that need to be done. But generally, the treasurer's the least one because they have the checkbook. But I'm sure that it's all in here. But usually, you need to have more than one person on the account so that if something goes wrong. And I was just wondering if that is recommended to be part of the secretary's role, or is that something that you wouldn't recommend?
I actually would recommend it as part of the secretary's role. So having backup check writers is a thing that you do in January, basically when the new board comes on, and you can identify and have people go to the banks and do the signature card thing. I think there was some discussion of that in the previous session where there was difficulty with getting the banks to recognize that, and there's a process that you have to go through. The process that the banks have for that is all based on the Patriot Act, and so it's trying to prevent money laundering and weird fraud and for terrorist organizations. But I would recommend having multiple people. We had an issue when the district secretary or district treasurer was sick for a little while, where we had to sort of suddenly get another person available to write checks and do that for the interim. And it would be better to have a plan in advance and have that be possibly the secretary and possibly the president as people that are additional signatories on that and go through the process with the bank.
Our chapter usually has 2 additional signatories, so, and traditionally that has been the president, but I just didn't know what everybody else does.
Well, and in some cases you'll have a setup where you need to have 2 signatures on every check. In which case then, the one person is writing the check and doing the first signature, and then they have to bring it to a rehearsal or something to get the second signature. Arnie, I think you were up next.
Maintaining the database, what we do is we have the Google Drive situation, and then I also save it to a drive the executive committee knows about, that I have it on my computer, and worst come to worst, they could come and get the drive and so on. It's not all cloud storage. We duplicate it on at least one computer. The other thing about database management, for example, maintaining the contact lists of phone numbers and emails and addresses. We have our own chapter webpage. Of course, Barbershop Harmony Society has their webpage. And of course, I have my own contact list in my phone. And sometimes keeping track of it all gets to be a deal. What we encourage our members to do is for themselves to update the chapter webpage and the Barbershop Harmony webpage. But I end up having to double check before contests or shows ahead of time, because sometimes what happens is they update their information, but they don't tell anybody that they've done that. And it's just like a detail schmetail situation. And we recently had to cancel a rehearsal, and we discovered in the process of trying to get a hold of everybody that's not one but several people had changed their phone numbers and emails. And so that's a process where there's the official way to take care of things, but Secretary and Treasurer, we have to keep up on it and share information between each other.
Yeah. So I would say, you know, in a sense, the sanctioned way of keeping track of that information, the contact information in particular, is through the member center, and encouraging your members to keep that information up to date there. There are reports that both the Secretary and Treasurer can pull from the member center, and so doing that fairly regularly is a way of not having to completely recreate that list, but really just getting an extract from the BHS database. That doesn't help your phone individually, which you just sort of have to do on your own. I'd say the idea of having a physical drive, yeah, it relies on there being access to your home, and I don't know how reliable that access is if you suddenly win the lottery and go running off to the tropics or something like that. But I think, you know, in the days of electronic devices, I think having your documents on a thumb drive or a collection of thumb drives that you then hand out to the board members is another way of providing that backup that's not reliant on cloud space. And thumb drives are just ridiculously dirt cheap for the amount of volume that you need to put on them. So
yeah, and if I could add something, there's two things that, one is the reports that Chris just mentioned come in Excel spreadsheets. You can download them, and if you do that monthly, it's an excellent tracking. Also, I found, just like for people coming and going and stuff, and who was there at what time. But in addition, you have to consider that you can't just publish that, because it has all the information in it, and the society preferences that people are allowed to pick, you know, like don't publish my phone number. Well, all that stuff's in there. So you can't just take that for privacy purposes and publish it. So I would definitely suggest to be careful with that information, but it's great for the secretary. The officers all have, the top 3 officers all have access to that. So it's very, very good to use that as the primary reference. And that's where in the last session we were talking about it, is that the secretary or somebody should be going through, and if people can't update it themselves, you know, just go to them in the chapter meetings and get their information, and then you may have to do it for them, but somebody has to do that.
yeah, and that really helps us at the district level with our communications, because, you know, we want to have the ability to send you the timber and the green sheet on a regular basis, and that means we need to have your updated and current email address. And so I think there's significant benefits to the members of keeping that information updated. It also helps with all of the communications at all the different levels. That issue of privacy is quite important, and we've had discussions within the communications team about whether or not a particular use of that data is permitted, and it's important to do that well.
I would like to suggest that there's also a really important link with whoever your membership chair is. As a secretary, almost half of my time is spent dealing with membership issues, particularly because the website doesn't notify me of anything. And so we've recently had the experience where all of the members who were paying monthly have been lapsed, some of them for several years. And if you ask them, they'd say they're members. But what the society has done with their pay-as-you-go Joe old system is pretty revolting. And I had a dozen members that I had to reinstate, get restarted, and that 33% surcharge is a bit much.
Agreed. It is unfortunate that the system does not provide any notifications of any of these events, right? It's really on the secretary and or the treasurer to do that download of that spreadsheet periodically and look for potential issues and then work them through. Better technology would make that easier, but this is what we've got.
Yeah, and another quick note on that is you can sort by expiration date. Of course, that's a pain in the neck. One of my sore spots on the member center is that, yeah, all those people that are renewing monthly will sort at the top as they're about to expire, of course. And so you have to get past those. And for me, at least, the only way I've really discovered to do that is to just go through on each person detail page and find out if they have auto renew on or not. And it would be nice if they had that in a column or something, a check mark right there. I should probably submit that to them that
Yes.
says auto renewals on, because then you don't really need to worry about it. And I believe you can also have auto renewal on for annual, but that seems to be pretty rare. But that's how I found out I usually end up doing the contest verifications. So I have to go through those and just like everybody's complaining about it. And there are little tips that'll make it easier though.
Okay, so there's a couple of messages that have come through in the chat. Michael from Sequardsman is plugging Google for nonprofits, and that sounds like a better solution than the original Google Drive for being able to share information across the officers. Because there will be private information in that information, you'll need to be sure to sort of carefully manage who has access to that account. You probably have to change the password when you have at the annual changeover of the board. If you have outgoing members, you probably need to remove them from being able to have access to that. Is the chapter secretary responsible for updating chapter members? You can ask the chapter members to do that themselves. If they're not particularly technology savvy, then it might be easier for the chapter secretary to do it for them. I don't think it's entirely incumbent on the secretary to do it, but it's probably pragmatic to do it. And Bob Cox wants to know if we want to do a bi-monthly Zoom meeting to keep in contact and share ideas and challenges. So I think that's a question to all of those who are currently on the call. I'm certainly available to do that if we want to do that.
Chris, this is Bob. What I'm going to do is I'm going to reach out to BHS and see if I can get, as the chapter development person for the district, see if I can get an updated list or monthly lists of individuals whose dues are coming up, and then be able to send that out to your membership person and as part of their retention team, and also to the secretary so that they can kind of see who's on that list also. So that's something that we're working on to make the communications a little bit better and work on retaining the members that we currently have.
Okay, that sounds good. The ideas, information, and challenges part of that, I have found so far that that like the content for the leader news is pretty much an auto repeat from year to year. If you were to pay very close attention to that, you'd note actually the communications team was ghostwriting all of that content for me on the basis of the information from this training, and just repeating it year over year. So I'm curious whether or not we come up with new issues that meeting that frequently might provide solutions for, or if we end up sort of recycling some of the same issues.
My idea behind that is that there are people that don't read, as we found out earlier from our presentation or president's class is that there's 70% of the people that don't get the message or don't understand what's going on. And a lot of those are
Okay.
chapter officers. So if it's, I think it's important that we keep these lines of communications open. Even if it's repeating what's in the leadership newsletter, being able to share that and offer opportunities for people to become more effective in their leadership responsibilities.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So can I post the links? I'm trying to figure out how to do that.
I've got it, Chris. Don't worry about it. Got you covered.
Okay. In which case I will not do that. Anyway, the links are all into a single set of documents that is the BHS online training for chapter secretaries. So you could go to the higher level document, and then there's quite a bit more material, and then these will be sort of individual chapters within that section, within that whole document.
Just for the chapter leaders, I would like to thank you for doing the EVG leadership news, because that is very timely. It's nice to have something just come through and ping you regularly and make sure that you're up, you didn't forget something. So I do appreciate that. That didn't used to happen, and it's a great thing that the chapter, or the district, I mean, is doing now. So appreciate that.
And I would sort of further plug that. I think I did a little report for myself, and I think it's something like a third to maybe half of the chapter secretaries have been in role for less than 2 years. And so it's the case that we have a lot of people that are new at this role and could use some sort of support system. And so I'm glad that we're doing that publication as one way to sort of give them kind of timely information about what they need to be doing. And then there was somebody that's been a chapter secretary for something like 40 or 50 years, and I'd like to know how they even managed that. I think they must have been elected the chapter secretary for like when they were 12 years old or something. Katie, that question's for you. But you're on mute.
You mean I'm just not constantly talking to everybody all day today?
So
The chat log, I don't believe that will be available after the meeting, because when you record a meeting, I don't believe it also records the notes. I could be super wrong on that, but we do have any of the links to the training material. I just posted that in here. So like the material that Bill, you shared this morning, I believe that's on the website already. Your PowerPoint presentation. Yeah.
PowerPoint's not up there, but I'll get it to Judy.
Yeah, you get that to Judy, and then she can upload that onto that site. But the Leadership Academy page where everybody registered for this has, if you scroll down to the bottom, it has a bunch of different links. The links that we use today for Chris's class, and then also there's the same thing for the treasurer and the president side of things with the slides that we use today for Chris. That's all at the bottom of the webpage. So, and that's all provided straight from BHS for chapter leader guidance. So all brand new, updated too, as of I think last year.
I can answer the Zoom question. When the chat links are not available on the recording. However, if you will put your cursor in the chat and then do Control A and Control C, you can copy everything that's there into a Word document.
Awesome.
You can also just save it as a text file if you just click on go down to the 3 dots at the lower right, and it's I've been doing that during the chat. It says save chat. Yeah.
Remember, I told you I was an analog guy in a digital world, David. You're more digital than I am.
Yeah, people now are sharing how many secretaries have been in the secretary position for longer than 5 years, other than Dick.
So there are a
Jerry?
total of 11 in the district that have been 5 or more years. And then the one that I was talking about that has the greatest longevity is Nathan Mitz from Canby, Oregon, who's been at it for 56 plus years.
Good grief.
So he'd be with the Pitch Pipers, yeah? Pitch Pipers, love those guys.
The average, if you don't count like the top 2, which sort of skew the data a lot, the average is 3 years and the median is under 2 years.
Boy, Mr. Numbers.
Take out the outliers, right?
Yeah, I am a spreadsheet numbers geek, former chapter treasurer for 5 years. So yeah.
Do you have the numbers on the presidents? I'm curious how many presidents have been in there for a while.
I have not done that because it wasn't like a specific need of mine. I needed to figure out the chapter secretaries one. So that's why I did that.
Thank you.
Well, we have about 12, 13 minutes left in this secretary portion of the day. So if you have any pressing questions that Chris may be able to help with, now's your chance, unless you want to save it for general session at 3. Chris, you might have just done just the perfect job that everybody has all their questions answered.
Or I've stumped the panel so completely they're speechless.
Oh, salt and pepper.
Well, I learned something today that I think our chapter has avoided having the secretary be on the financial accounts as a check signer for whatever reason in the past. They thought it was a conflict of interest or something. But since it's recommended, that we'll pursue that.
Yep. Yeah, I think having backups in all your positions is, especially with data access or access to money, that kind of thing, I think it's always a good idea. And I'm sure there's somebody on the call that would probably also be advocating for succession planning as a thing that your board should be doing.
Yeah, Miss Karen Fuel. Go ahead. Yeah, I think it's really important to do that specifically with your top 3, the treasurer, president, and secretary, to keep that consistent mind of leadership. I think is really important, to keep solid thread. Karen has been the treasurer for PDX Voices now for at least a year. And then she now is, I don't know if you would call it graduating or not, but she is now graduating to the chapter secretary role, chapter treasurer role. So it's pretty neat to have somebody who's already been serving on the ensemble management side, so she knows everything that's happening on an ensemble side, and then taking that perspective up into the chapter level. I think is, at least for our chapter, is going to be really valuable. So kind of also evaluating how your chapter functions. Do you only have one ensemble? Do you have multiple ensembles? And what are the goals of your chapter versus the goals of your ensembles? Really important big picture conversations that are really great to have at the top of the year or at the end of the year leading into the top of the year. Help set your leaders up for success.
Thanks, Karen, and good to see you too.
Yes, I got myself together.
As if you needed it. You're lovely.
There's a question in the chat, and I don't have a good answer. So the charity shows paying music use costs. Is that for Canada too? And I don't know the answer to that question. I would need to go to BHS and ask them that, unless there's somebody in the Canadian chapter that knows the answer. And I don't. Okay, so I think you probably still have to do the SOCAN file filing. Whether or not there's payment associated with that would be something you might be able to learn from going through that process online.
Well, how do you feel, Chris? You feel like you said all the things you wanted to say? Everybody got their questions out of the way?
Yeah, I think we've done kind of the most critical things. I think there's a lot of detail in the role, and I do recommend doing the full online training to get all of those details. But I think in terms of just sort of highlighting places to look and things to know about, I think we've done it.
Yeah, I mean, I think to be really fair, anybody that's stepping into especially one of these big three positions that are, legally required for nonprofit status, I think it would be really important for everyone to go and view those BHS chapter leader training and really take a minute to absorb that information. Honestly, you can do any one of, especially these big three, but any of the 5 classes that we're having today, any of the 5 sessions, it could easily be spread out into a 4 or 5 hour long intensive study. So the fact that we're smashing through this in under an hour, I want to acknowledge the leaders who are leading these sessions. Like, thank you so very much for condensing what we can, and getting the information to our leaders in the chapters in our district. But again, just to encourage everybody that's on the call to take a view on those BHS chapter leader trainings. If you are on the call and you see one of the other 2 leaders that are in maybe the other president or treasurer positions, encourage them to go view those videos. We all carry a weight of burden to make sure that everybody on our teams have the most information and the most appropriate information whenever possible, so that we're not every man for themselves, but we are a larger team. We have teams within our ensembles, we have teams within our chapters, but this is also your team within the district. Every little square you see on this screen is somebody that you could reach out to if you have questions on something, and I bet if they didn't know the answer, they could give you an idea of who you could talk to. So nobody is on a boat alone. Nobody is on an island in this district. We are very well connected, and we have a wealth of information that you can lean into if you do have any questions. So feel safe in that.
Along those
you are
lines,
not alone.
Katie, if I may, along those lines, you'll note there are a couple of people on the call who are not on incoming secretaries. They're incoming presidents. And we made the point in the president's call that the president needs to know a lot more about what's going on in the chapter than he or she thinks he or she might. And the more they know about these two roles, secretary and treasurer, the more likely you're going to have a cohesive team at the top.
Knowledge is power, right? Well, yes, and Dick, you might physically be on an island, yes, but theoretically.
There's got a boat, you can get off the island, Dick.
There's one more comment in the chat that I think I can address. So the question about paying for charity shows, and the comment is, I think you're correct for shows organized by the chapter, and that is a really good distinction. For shows that your ensemble or chapter are participating in that are organized and produced by somebody else, that somebody else is accountable for doing the software license or the music licensing. And in some rare cases, as with PDX, the venue that they perform in actually holds the license. And in that case as well, the chapter is not required to do their own licensing.
All questions that should be asked, so you don't have to spend your hard-earned money on stuff that you don't necessarily have to. So I think Artie brought up a really great idea. If we feel okay, why don't we take a 5-minute snack and potty break? Or you can just hang out and keep chatting. We're here for it. I've got to go put a roast in the oven, so it's a great timing for me.
What time is dinner at your place?
Well, it has to be small dinner because I'm taking the rest to potluck.
And do we need to bring anything?
Right. Oh, my house is small. Okay, well, I'm going to shut off my camera for just a moment while I go take care of the roast.
I see you're still here, Chris. Oh, maybe not.
Yep, I am.
Oh, there you go. Okay, the pictures just shifted around right then. I lost track of it. We had a weird show situation where we were going to put on, well, the Portland Metro chapter was going to put on a quartet sort of contest. And originally we thought, well, we'll have the people in the contest pay so that we would have enough money to pay for the venue. And then the board wanted to change it so that we would charge a general admission. And so I don't know if you remember, I did send a message to the district, and I don't know who all saw it, but trying to sort this out, just like who is responsible in that case for the payment. And like, so if we put on this, say it's a competition of novice quartets is what the idea originally was. It's like, well, we don't know what they're going to sing. So how do you who are we responsible for that? How do you make that all covered, as far as all this BMI and CSAC stuff goes? And that was also in the middle of when the chapter, I guess the society changed the rules, because originally I was told, okay, as long as you're not charging anybody, it's good. You don't have to pay anything. And then by the time the show was going to be on, the rule had been changed. So that was not fun. But
So yeah, contests I am not super expert at. The contest and events team have done that mostly at the district level. But I believe
contest
that
loosely. I mean that
but I believe I mean in a formal contest setting, I believe that the quartets submit the list of songs that they will be performing, and that those can be then incorporated into the licensing process that the organizing body is doing. If the organizing body is the district, then the district is doing that. If the organizing body is a chapter, then the chapter is doing that. And I think you'd have to go through the process of collecting the information, and especially since if the show is available to the public at all, then you would be accountable for doing the BMI CSAC process.
Yeah, thank you. That does sound rational and logical. So, if not fun.
Right, it's a lot of work to know what all the quartets are going to do. All right, well, thanks everybody. I will jump off now, and I will be back at 3 o'clock if there are other questions.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Bob, it's worth considering. One thing, it's sort of like when you see the judging community where you've got the common area. I'm seeing a lot of common area between the three major responsibilities here.
Yeah, there's really a lot. And it's the communications aspect. It's knowing what your responsibilities are and then doing what needs to be done. If we miss a report in any way, shape, or form, we have the potential of losing a license and losing a chapter. So It's very important that you all communicate and know what those checkpoints are and what those dates are that you need to be filing reports and getting that information in.
Let me make a slightly different point. The district is making a very concerted and sincere effort to give chapters the tools to succeed. We're sending out communications, but the information is not reaching the people who need it within the chapters. So what we need to do as chapter leaders is to ensure that we take this information and spread it around. Bob, for one, I know when he gets a communication from the district, whether it be the timber, the green sheet, or whatever, he rebroadcasts it to everybody in the chapter just to make sure that they all get it. And then he talks about it in the chapter. So this is a tool that you as chapter leaders can use to increase the knowledge about what the chapter responsibilities and actions are.